So, evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar on adaptability and innovation in healthcare. We thought that given the circumstances, it's probably a perfect time for this discussion, and given we're all having to adapt to huge changes in our lives, and it's innovation and flexibility that's helping us get through. And leading tonight's discussion is Robin Lansman, who is an osteopath and is past president of the Institute of Osteopathy. He's also a coach on the Student Leadership Programme, and you may recognise him from our meeting in Reading last month. We want this to be a lively discussion and a place for everyone to share thoughts and ideas. And like I say, you can submit questions on the Q&A function at the bottom, and also you can use the live chat, or I hope there should be a raise your hand option. If you do want to speak, don't worry, you won't be on video, so you don't need to be worried about showing everyone your pajamas like me. I'm going to start by asking Robin to give a bit of background into his leadership journey, and then we can get underway with tonight's discussion points. So
I'd love to. Yeah, just a little thank you, Nadia. That's very kind. And thanks everyone for joining. Just to say a little bit about me, I mean, some extra things, I suppose. I mean, I started actually doing a lot of the youth leadership work. It came to me between my late teens, actually 17, 18, 19 and 20 roughly. And that was actually quite interesting in terms of exploring very much collaborative working, because the style of youth leadership was actually building programs and working with young people who were, you know, between the ages of about 10 and 14 or so. So not actually that much younger than I, but it was a very interesting experience. And my parents, funny enough, had both done youth work before. So that was something kind of in the blood, and a very useful experience. And again, there was quite a lot of camaraderie with the actual other youth leaders as well. So the other thing I've done, I started doing quite a lot of stuff after studying osteopathy. I went in when I was about, well, literally 18 to 22 was my studying time, so quite some time ago, but at quite a young age. And I know a lot of the people I've been coaching for the Council of Deans are mature students, but in fact, many of you are from school age, and maybe a little bit beyond that. And it's interesting that you can get very bogged down, I think, over years of study and hard work, and I did, and everyone does, and then actually suddenly explored things like theatre and started to do some acting and tried out eventually actually some theatre directing, which is another, I guess, form of leadership and team working. And I found that interesting because these are all voluntary people actually who are just doing it for fun. It wasn't professional, but it was, I hope, to a good standard. And that was actually a process of bringing together a team, working with a team, negotiating their free time really and their good spirit to try and pull together a production. And yeah, you do always have to have a little falling out to kind of pull it together. And as the old saying goes, the show must go on. It's one of those things where I think it taught me quite a lot actually to manage a group and to deal with the leadership of bringing a play on and bringing up what you want as your vision and your mission and vision to deliver something that's meaningful, but at the same time work with a team who are allowed to have input and change things a little and make suggestions. At the end of the day though, it is the director's cut, so to speak, that makes that kind of, can I say, final decision how it's going to be, but taking into account everyone's thoughts and feelings. So that's a little bit of intro. And again, all these things have gone on through lecturing and teaching, and that's, and again, a little bit of, again, standing on a platform and delivering information and sharing information. And I think the one thing I've always thought about teaching and lecturing is you've got to learn something from your audience as well as actually, can I say, just give out information. I think you get much more out of it and they get much more out of it. So we are going to leave plenty of time for questions, so don't worry about that. And then during my later parts of my career in the last 5 or 7 years, I've done a lot of stuff to do with the organizations in osteopathy. I was president of our institute. And so there were lots of different challenges in governance and all sorts of areas that I had to get involved with. And again, a lot of this was done without formal leadership training, but was extremely interesting to learn about. But actually on the hoof, one of the things I've discovered speaking to people who are in leadership positions now in the NHS, for example, who didn't have that training, it's very, very challenging to take on new roles, take on new responsibilities, and not have that leadership background and thinking that helps you deal with difficult situations and challenges that arise. So I think that's, I've learned it along the way, and that's why I'm delighted to share at least experience and some of the pitfalls, because I think that's important, the real me. It's not all from a book. And then since I've actually read so much more. It's a bit like reading the plays to do the theatre. It's catching up a little bit on some of the theory to sort of enhance your experiential learning, if you like. So that's my potted few minutes of introduction about where I've come from. And the Council of Deans programme for 150 Leaders has been really a revelation, and amazing for me to work with other leaders who are the other coaches, and obviously to work with the students and see what they're made of and see where they want to go with their sort of role in their healthcare leadership roles. So that's a little bit to lead in.
Thank you, Robin. And so I think we should just probably get straight underway with the first question. So the first question we had is, why is adaptability and innovation a benefit in healthcare delivery? And how does it benefit the present and the future? Just for a bit of format, if Robin starts us off with some responses to the question, then if anyone else wants to chip in, they're more than welcome to if they want to speak, or if you want to post in the chat.
Well, I think often as we have a time of crisis and when the stress is on, that kind of has to make everything run at twice the speed and try and make good decisions on the hoof. And as I've said, that puts a lot of pressure on. So there is something about adaptability and innovation that almost needs to come in when you're not under pressure, to learn a little bit how to do it, really, how to plan the recipe, how to plan what you're doing, and therefore hopefully manage to adapt as things change, and be a little bit more agile in your leadership style. And that sort of agility, I think, is really something you kind of learn from the outset. In fact, going back to the acting example and the theatre directing example, there's something in there where, you know, when the lines go wrong on stage and just for a moment, all the actors are looking at each other like they're sort of caught in the headlights thinking what comes next. It feels like hours, but the audience hopefully don't notice as much of the, can I say, panic on stage. But that eye contact that says, we've skipped a line, we've gone round the wrong way, and then actually have to make something work and pull it together and keep the show going. And it's a very interesting, stressful time, under scrutiny, people watching, to develop that. So you almost do have to innovate and adapt on the hoof to try and make those changes that are, well, they are changes from the prescripted plan, but it works. Yeah, and I think for present and future, so we've talked really about the present is all around us and planning for the future. I mean, you don't know exactly, in a sense, what could go wrong. And again, the theatre example is not a bad one, but things do change and fluctuate. And each different night, you're going to get a slightly different change of plan or a slightly different hiccup that makes things go slightly differently again. Sometimes there are advantages in those adaptations and innovations. In fact, you produce something that that actually makes it even more interesting, sometimes, or more challenging, and produces questions, which we're hoping for now. Does anyone have any?
Oh, we've got a question in the Q&A from Joy. She says, I guess adaptability is having the plans but allowing it to unfold without preconception.
Well, I think if I'm right in understanding the question, what we're thinking is that you could have several scenarios that could unravel. If that is the question, I think it is. So that you kind of do have a sort of a way of rolling out various different options to play them out and to practice a little bit of that beforehand. So you can have a fallback plan, and you can have, you know, various other alternative plans A, B, and C that you can explore and so on. And that's useful practice in dealing with situations. And certainly in organisations, having a risk register, for example, that is actually something that you know, is put in place to try and look into the future and wonder what might go wrong or what could be a problem.
Hi. Yeah, it was more, I guess, about not being stressed as a leader when things don't go as you had planned or intended or forevisioned. It was learning that resilience, I guess, and by being adaptive, that's potentially a source of strength in those scenarios.
Well, I would also say investing in your team so you actually have got that confidence that there's flexibility within the whole system. I think that's something to sort of explore, you know, at the earliest possible stage about anything that should come up, even if it's small. Because those little practice runs at small things are very useful to extrapolate into bigger situations. You get to know how people respond in difficult situations, generally.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I hope that answers.
Thanks, Joy.
Yep.
We've also got a question from Matthew, who says, how do you train to manage the real world stress of thinking on your feet? Because it's quite hard to simulate.
Mm-hmm.
in
Well,
real
as
life?
I said, I mean, I'll use I don't want to use the acting example too much, but actually, having an audience, giving a presentation, let's say, to a group of people that you could prepare for something, and under the pressure of having a room full of people, it can make it a lot more difficult to deal with. And so running that example, even that simple example, is actually quite useful. So standing up and doing presentations, speaking to a group, speaking to a new group, trying out an idea, it's something that builds confidence, and it allows you to take questions and hear the questions and get your material, in a sense, in place. So there are ways, not always completely at the knife edge, if you like, but nevertheless a good chance to experience and explore and see how it went down with the team on any topic, really. So I'm sure many people in any of the health spheres, there's always going to be moments and difficult things to discuss. And actually, I think probably when you're handling things in front of a patient, let's say there's a team of health practitioners, and you've got a patient there, and how you deal with what happens in the room with the patient and how you deal with that outside. I mean, these are very real. That is, in a sense, being on the stage. That is actually having to deal with something that's there and now, very much so.
And actually, sort of building on that, Alison, who's a dietitian, has also kind of asked, do you have any tips on how we can make decisions under pressure?
Well, again, I mean, practice
It's more the
helps.
decision-making aspect.
Yeah, I mean, under pressure. Well, I don't know if there's an example particularly to discuss. Has she got an example, perhaps, of something that's happened or something that she can share within reason?
I don't have a specific example. I really liked the term leadership agility that you described when you're adapting, perhaps on the hoof, and it was just some general top tips in terms of when we are under pressure, maybe on the wards. There's a lot going on, especially at the moment. Whether you've got any sort of like general top tips, really.
Yeah, I think what's happened, and that's a great question, because I think professionalism is something I taught with some of the other osteopathic students and others I've coached, in fact, is reverting to, even if times are tough and you've had a sort of not a great encounter with a colleague, or there's been a very big stressful situation with patients, that reverting or pulling back into your professional self. So having a sense of that professionalism and how you'd want to be heard and put across, even if things are really putting you under pressure, I would say it's absolutely critical to find that professionalism in yourself, where there's a sort of a type of choice of language and words that's particularly selected with great care. And that I think is something that anybody can do in a difficult situation. That at least gives them a place to go to where, even if it's really tough, that's the job we're doing, and that's my professional leadership that's coming out. I don't know if that helps. I hope it does.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Great, pleasure.
Yeah, sorry, we've got a question from Katie.
I am, thank you. I was just going to briefly mention that looking at events after they've happened, it has been useful for me in the past in terms of performing a root cause analysis. I know that's something more traditionally found in business, which is my first background, but I do find it helpful, especially when dealing with situations that I felt I did not handle as well. I can always sit back and say, all right, what went well, what went wrong? And then I can take those lessons learned and move forward from there.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. I think, those moments of reflection don't always come, can I say consciously, but literally in the middle of the night sometimes. It's slightly awful, but even after 30 odd years in practice, one deals with situations and thoughts and could have said it differently, and what was the effect of how that went. And these reflections come sometimes in the middle of the night, and I write them down. And that actually is, that's sometimes how it comes. It doesn't have to come consciously. I mean, obviously reflecting deeply about things you can do to a point, but what you tend to find is by being very busy and there is pressure and there's lots to do, these things don't always come to the surface exactly at the moment that might be most useful at that exact time. So I think that's kind of what you were perhaps saying as well, that going back and breaking it down. I mean, obviously you can also drive yourself slightly into a hole by persecuting yourself. I mean, if you've been professional and tried your best and taken things as far forward as you could, and you've communicated as well as you can, then sometimes you do have to let yourself off the hook as well. Otherwise it becomes quite destructive at the same time.
Right. There doesn't appear to be as big a push within healthcare to perform sort of in-depth disaster recovery exercises as is seen in other industry areas. I'd be curious if you want to touch on that later. I'm sure there's other folks that have other topics to bring up.
Okay, well, thank you for that one. We'll make a note. That's good. Thank you.
We've got a question from Sam. Sam, correct me if I'm misinterpreting your question, but Sam is asking about the interprofessional aspect of adaptability. What kind of role does interprofessionalism have to play when we're trying to be adaptable? And do you agree that the type of interprofessional learning promoted by organisations such as 150 Leaders, and do you think that should be expanded more widely?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the thing is, it's breaking down those boundaries, barriers, finding, I can say, personal, professional connections with colleagues in different areas of your own world, as well as parallel professions that you interact with. It probably does mean getting those relationships up and running, learning how other people are thinking, looking at the constraints on them, and actually getting to understand those on a daily basis before there is anything that becomes under a lot more pressure. I think trust and understanding and clearing up misunderstandings, really, and misconceptions is probably something to work at as much as possible while you are a student of health. And I think it's probably something always to come to, not to brush these difficulties under the carpet at any stage at all. Did that answer the question, Nadia? Or did I? It was a long question. Thank you, Sam.
I hope so. I'll have to ask Sam, but I'm sure he'll raise his hand if not. Shall we move to the next question, which I guess kind of links in with what we've been saying. But the next question is, as healthcare leaders, how can we be more agile and flexible to changing circumstances? And obviously this is crucial given what we're all facing at the moment. So Robin, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think what's been going on with allied healthcare over the last few years, really, or 2 or 3 or 4 years, has been amazing to bring together 14 different professions. The Council of Deans has brought connections between nursing and midwifery with allied healthcare as well. And that sort of idea of trust between such a large group of people evolving and developing is a way of having crossovers of understanding. Now, that's something that's in its early infancy. There are plans to pull together certain skill sets in the different professions so that actually there's even more crossover. And in this current climate and difficulties that we're suffering now, for example, osteopaths, I mean, there are, I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 osteopaths in the UK. And I know many are desperate to help muck in with the NHS. Many are not. Most of them are private practitioners. But it actually would be, something that had those skills, had that kind of base, which they do in lots of the professions. There's crossover similarities where that would really, really help supply this agility that's needed in a crisis. And I think so that's something to push forward. So that, I think, going back to Sam's question as well, that interprofessional education and sharing of challenges doesn't mean that we all have to know what everybody else does, but what it is to have an appreciation of where to look and who to ask. I remember studying, Gray's Anatomy and looking at all the books when we were studying as students. And, it's knowing which page to go to or where to turn to, not necessarily having to remember absolutely everything, but having a concept around it. And I think that comes from that sort of trust in other professionals, trust in your own professionals, and learning from each other, very much so. And that gives the agility, that gives the flexibility that I think is needed going forwards into the future. Really, it is to adapt more quickly.
Thanks, Robin. And I know that, as all the students will know, that they have their own examples of where they're having to be more agile and think more innovatively, and I'm sure that links in with project ideas. I know Brian emailed me earlier about his project idea, which has come out entirely from the COVID situation. So I was wondering to the students who have joined us this evening, whether anyone else has any examples. I can see that Serena has also talked about how drama therapists are helping in the current crisis. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate, Serena, but if anyone else has any other points on that they'd like to raise. I know also Robin has an example of what you've been doing, i.e. with COGUK.
Well, yeah, we've been working. It was something that was in the works for a while, and then during the time that we had to close our practice and so on, it suddenly kind of pulled together an idea which I'd been working on. So COGUK.info, I mean, that's the website. We've been working on that for quite some weeks now, pulling it together to make an interprofessional platform so that students, undergraduates and postgraduates could actually share inwardly outwardly to each other, rather than necessarily remain in silos. And in fact, you know, that expression silos has come up in the coaching, and it's a useful term because people do get very locked into their ways of thinking with their own team, and it's important to develop that team, of course. So this project, the COGUK project, has actually been looking at getting that into some sort of virtual kind of sharing academy, if you like, and it's become very interesting who I've been talking to about it, and it's collaborative. I've set up, if you like, the bare bones of the website with Nick, in fact, who's been helping me, and he's worked with me very, very well, I think, to produce something that can be added to and changed and collaborated with. It's not a final end point by any means. So that's come up because of the time I've had during COVID, and actually just watching really all the other webinars and all the other people trying to pull things together amongst them. It's been phenomenal how much goes on different online groups and so on. I thought that was something to work with. So yeah, I mean, that's an innovation I'm pulling together, and it's come out of the current situation, very much so.
Great, thank you, Robin. I've got some people who have shared their examples. So David has shared that in a recent clinical governance. Say I found that there was a lot of research to prove that interprofessional learning and understanding breaks down many barriers in the workplace. It helps understand individual roles and responsibilities for the benefit of the team efforts.
Yeah, well, there's an awful lot of research, and there really is, about how you pull together interprofessional learning and you make it work. I mean, there are cases where, in fact, alienation can happen and there can be other problems. It's how it's handled and it's how it's put together. So there's a bit of a science in that, including research in that exact topic, not the subject matter so much as how you go about sharing and working with professionals. Now, I know certainly in stressful situations, people are thrown together. And again, they make it work and they learn. And a lot of the learning that's come out of, well, past wars and all sorts of situations creates changes in A&E care, creates changes in the way people are managed. So there's an awful lot of learning that comes out of crisis. And that interprofessionalism that often doesn't come together often enough. And under pressure, people are having conversations that perhaps they wouldn't have for years, but are now actually having to have them because that's the only way of making it all work. So it's a very valuable learning time in this pressure time, as it is being an undergraduate student. I think certainly coaching has it's shown me, talking to the students, that this chance to ask those questions and get in there and say what they have to say is so valuable. But really, in a sense, why shouldn't it continue on going? Because that's really almost the healthier way it could be maintained and could continue, would be my wish and hope. Yeah.
Just kind of as a result of some of the chat, but also thinking separately, in terms of getting out what AHPs are doing during this crisis, do you or anyone on the chat have any ideas about how we can raise the profile of what AHPs are doing in this crisis? Because it feels very focused on nurses who are doing a fantastic job, but I'm concerned that the contribution of other professionals might be not as widely promoted. I know Joy has mentioned on the chat about doing video diary blogs of AHPs and nurses to sort of evidence the student journey and adaptability during COVID. And so I just wondered if you had any ideas about what else we could do to...
Well, could I just mention something, because I've seen a few of the messages coming up as well. I mean, one thing we're doing with the COG project, and again, anyone who wants to join in and at least say they're interested as one of the students, I mean, I'm producing a series of interviews with various student health professionals to actually share what they would like to share with other professionals about what they do and how they do it. Because I think even when I meet people who've been in the practice field, whatever that might be, for 20 years, they still haven't had that chance to really learn from other healthcare professionals in that way. And that seems to be missing from many AHPs I've met at conferences. So I kind of think that's a really useful way of sharing and actually yeah, and actually learning. And I mean, what I've been doing is setting people 10 questions that they forward to me. And then, in fact, what I've been doing is interviewing people back based on their own questions to help them, but actually to lead them through a little bit of a journey through those questions. And I think, well, it's a format I'd like to try and be involved with and try and do, because I think it brings out, hope you want to bring out the best from the interviewee. And I think, and draw out that information that sometimes isn't as obviously needed to share. Sometimes the obvious stuff that doesn't get shared. So maybe that's the other thing actually to reflect on, is actually maybe also doing a little bit of an elevator pitch about what you do and how you wanted to put that across in a succinct way, because sometimes sitting and reflecting on that is a really good sort of short piece of writing that actually says who you are and what you're about as a healthcare professional. Are there any questions as well, I think, Nadia? Because I see them popping up, but I'm not sure.
I don't think there's questions, but it's good to hear that people's professions are being brought to the forefront. David was talking about his role as a student ODP, but ODPs in general are being heavily involved in ITU care due to their skills. So it's good that people are starting to recognise what ODPs do, and that is being brought to the forefront. So that's a very positive sign. I just wanted to check if anyone else had any other thoughts before we move on to our next question. You can raise your hand if so. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, because I think it's quite important actually, and something that particularly from my perspective students sometimes face, which is about how we can overcome barriers to innovation. I feel like I get a lot of emails particularly about setbacks and how to actually make things work in practice. So how can we overcome the barriers to innovation on healthcare?
That's for me, yeah, just initially to kick it off. Well, I think certainly over my career in 30 odd years, the idea of coming up with innovations, this is something I enjoy, and kind of on my reflections of things, I do make myself notes and have lots of ideas that come to the fore about ways to do things differently. And I think that is something you need to also find other people who are similar in the way that they want to make changes and they want to explore those ideas with you. So having a sort of a kind of say a colleague friend who will actually challenge them and actually allow you to explore the barriers you may come up against and make it more real than if you, in a sense, something that just is a dream. It's got to be something that's kind of realistic, and that's kind of something in leadership that's worth reflecting on. It's not to quash good ideas, but it is to see, really using some of the SMART goals type of ideas to see if you can run those through, whether you can feel that this can actually fulfill a niche or could actually make a difference, and something you personally have spotted is very, very valid. And I think it's quite often, you could be put down, you could be supported by some great, mentors and people within your teams and your tutors and so on, but also sometimes those ideas you can find that they fall on deaf ears at that moment in time, not necessarily forever. And I think that not giving up on something and holding on to it, it's not hammering at it, but perhaps holding on to it until there's an opportunity or a time or the right people you come across that you can actually see if you can channel that and take it forward. So I think those sorts of things have to happen. You will get barriers, and as you said, Nadia, knockbacks happen, and it is picking yourself up, and it might take a time to pick yourself up, but don't throw it all away. Don't smash all the pots you've been making, or rip up all those paintings in a sense, because it's a shame that some of those things will come to fruition. Not all of them, but some of them definitely will.
I just wondered if anyone else has any setbacks that they want to share or how they overcame them. I know lots of people, particularly the alumni, who have run projects and done things and have had to battle with things getting in the way. So I wonder if anyone wanted to share.
I think I'm not speaking of specifics, but I think it's worth going back, keeping a diary note. I think I said that at the conference in Reading actually, about keeping that filing cabinet drawer or whatever it is these days, more like a laptop, some sort of note or record of what you're feeling. In fact, I remember, I kept quite a close diary when I was president, some years, not many years back. I wrote and kept a note of lots of the things that came to my mind, and books I'd read or were suggested, and to try and actually learn a little bit from the difficulties, and needed colleagues also. I mean, particularly some support from colleagues who could be supportive but also challenge, because you know, you don't just want friends. You need people who are going to challenge you and actually test you a little bit as well, which I think helps. You've got a question, I think, or two popping up.
Yeah, Natalie has shared actually, and I know Natalie has said here that she, her initial project idea took quite a bit of time to try and get ethical approval from uni, and she says that it threw her, but actually knowing Natalie, she is completely motivated and came to me with a whole list of project ideas, and despite struggling to get this ethical approval from the university, it's not to say she didn't do amazing things anyway, so thank you for sharing, Natalie. And also Zoe has said about some of the setbacks, struggles getting access to people. I tried to get in front of students at university, but it wasn't always easy due to timetable clash and tight schedules. And I think, yeah, I mean, facing those hurdles, well, it's kind of always ongoing.
Logistics,
it's that resilience, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, well, logistics and finding the right time. I mean, what's interesting with all the webinars, I mean, everyone's done these type of calls before, but not, as we said at the beginning, as often as we have now. So, you know what, it's actually quicker now. I've done this with colleagues I never used to use on a video call. I mean, it's quite funny, actually, and having a chat and getting to know people or work a bit more in detail that way. So there are different ways of doing things. And actually, they've always been around, or they've been around for some years, and they're not always the first thing to think about. But actually, having that chat with people probably you've met before, at least on the whole. So even if it's over the phone or over a video call, you've got some sort of link with them, it helps. I think to make that relationship to start with and that trust. So yeah, it is, but it is logistically difficult, especially if everyone's really busy to pull things together. But again, it will happen eventually. And some things also, the other benefit of time is, of course, things do modify in one's mind, and actually the burning issue a few weeks down the line or whatever has actually shifted a bit, and sometimes for the better, in a way that it's a different question and a different thing to deal with. It wasn't necessarily the same, it's not necessarily the same question it had been. So that little bit of time for things to dwell and to mull over, it has its benefits as well, I think.
Okay, in which case I want to say a huge thank you to Robin for leading tonight's discussion. This is our kind of first real online discussion webinar, so thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for joining. If you do have any more ideas for discussions, please do let me know. If you have any topic areas, or if you'd like to lead a discussion, please do let me know. Once again, thank you so much to Robin, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening.
That's a pleasure, and I hope everyone keeps well and safe and keeps up the good work. I know it's a tough time, so thank you very much for taking time out now. It's kind of you.